Like any other year, 2019 has seen its fair share of both good and bad releases. The good, thankfully enough, have been very, very good, but then again, there have been some real stinkers as well. In this feature, having crossed the halfway mark of the year, we'll be taking a look at what we feel are the 15 worst games of 2019 so far. Some of these are clearly much, much worse than the others mentioned on this list, but in our estimation, no other games from the first 6 months of 2019 deserve these dubious honors as much as these 15 do. So without further ado, let's get started. Sniper Elite V2 Remastered. Sniper Elite V2 was a solid entry in the stealth franchise back when it first launched, but with its subsequent installments, it made plenty of improvements to better the quality of the experience. The remaster, released quite recently, had the opportunity to elevate the original title by introducing some of these changes, but sadly, it ends up showing how poorly Sniper Elite 2 has aged. It looks decent enough, sure, but if you're looking for the definitive Sniper Elite experience, there are much better options out there. Anthem. It's painful that a game made by BioWare is figuring into a list such as this one, but such are the times that we live in. Anthem had a lot of great ideas on paper, but it doesn't execute most of them very well. Flight feels great, but that ends up being the only thing in the game's moment-to-moment gameplay that can be lauded. The mission design is repetitive, the game is lacking in content, the combat mechanics feel half-baked, the social elements and the narrative focus conflicts with each other, and even the narrative itself is disappointing. Anthem had the potential to be something excellent, but sadly, much of that potential has been left in the dirt. The LEGO Movie 2 video game. TT Games' LEGO titles have settled into a comfortable formula over the years, and it's a formula that's worked very well for the series. But the LEGO Movie 2 video game is where that formula has started to wear thin. Boring combat, dull open-world gameplay, and disjointed storytelling are the most noticeable of its laundry list of shortcomings. Layers of Fear 2. Horror is not an easy thing to get right, but the first Layers of Fear successfully managed to do just that, which is why it's all the more surprising that its sequel fails so badly. Layers of Fear 2 feels like a checklist of horror tropes, throwing one not-so-terrifying scene at the player after another, all the while displaying disappointing creative bankruptcy. It's got some weird sights and sounds to enjoy, sure, but sadly that's about the best that can be said about it. Fade to Silence. Fade to Silence is not a game without merits. The thing is, those merits are abstract ideas, and in execution, none of those ideas work very well. Its survival mechanics are very limited, which isn't ideal in a game about survival. It's plagued with technical issues, its open-world design is uninspired and at times flat-out broken. Like so many other games on this list, Fade to Silence just isn't ever able to do justice to some pretty interesting ideas. Left Alive. There was a decent amount of excitement surrounding Left Alive before it launched. With its stealth gameplay, its focus on narrative, and the art by Yoji Shinkawa, it looked sort of like an off-brand Metal Gear experience that, if done right, would have been pretty well received. Unfortunately, it wasn't done well. There's a severe lack of polish bringing down its already unoriginal and shoddy gameplay, along with a lot of other issues that came together to make this a game that's better left alone. Jump Force. Jump Force generated lots of hype when it was first announced at E3, with the promise of flashy, explosive battles. Sign us up, right? Well, sadly, the game didn't live up to its immense potential. The lackluster story and occasionally repetitive combat make this an overall disappointing affair. Xenon Racer. The racing genre is dominated by simulation titles, which means that, with the exception of a few notable names, arcade racers have pretty much fallen by the wayside over the last few years. Xenon Racer deserves credit for trying its hand at that style of racing experience, and though it can be occasionally fun, by and large, issues such as uneven AI and finicky controls cripple the experience. Fimble. Fimble isn't a game without merits. It's got a beautiful visual aesthetic, and it actually tells a pretty decent story. But actually playing the game is an exercise in patience. The combat is a big letdown, the camera can be an absolute mess, the game is marred by a litany of bugs, while the entire experience is woefully short as well. This game deserves credit for the things that it does get right, but they aren't enough to make up for its shortcomings. The Grand Tour Game. Video game adaptations of TV shows or films rarely ever work, and the Grand Tour game doesn't do so either. It's got some weird ideas of melding its episodic structure with its TV roots, but the crux of all of its issues lie in very gamey things, in that there just isn't enough game here. The Grand Tour game feels half-baked and limited, and ends up being a shallow experience that relies on fan service and nothing more. You know what? Stick with MLB The Show. If you don't have a PlayStation, go with literally anything else. Anything but this. This is a sorry attempt at a baseball sim title. It's hollow, empty, dull, and utterly boring, lacking in any sort of depth, mechanical or otherwise, to actually engage the player. Even in terms of content, there's not a great deal here to see or enjoy. If you're looking for a baseball game, there are other, far better options out there. Our World is Ended. When a game puts a period in its title, as Our World is Ended does, you can probably guess that something's not quite right with it. But enough with the irrelevant nitpicks, because there's no shortage of actual issues that make this a disappointing and dull affair. It forces brazenly offensive humor down the player's throat, shamelessly makes use of unacceptable storytelling devices, and does it all seemingly for no good reason. It tries to do that thing that visual novels do by being all weird and shocking, but it doesn't even do it well on a surface level, let alone actually being effective at it. Pumped BMX Pro. It's often said that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but one look at Pumped BMX Pro should be enough to give you an idea of what sort of experience this is, one that you should walk away from. A game like this needs to get one thing right above all else: controls. Pumped BMX Pro fails at that more often than it should. It also doesn't have anywhere close to the amount of technical or mechanical depth that it needs to be successful at what it attempts. War Party. The RTS genre is one that values mechanical depth and strategy above all else, but War Party is lacking in both. It's a disappointingly simple and as such shallow game that is also marred by issues that games of this genre should avoid, such as uneven AI, pathfinding issues, and the like. It's not a terrible game per se, but it's not a good one either. Feather. Feather can be a very serene experience. It's a calming exploration-focused game with solid art design. But Feather, it seems, is also very appropriately named because of how shockingly light it is on content. There isn't a whole lot to do or see here. In fact, you can pretty much do everything there is to be done in the game in less than an hour. It just isn't worth the price of admission, not even close. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.